Question: is it true that the people who are corporate leaders, they have a higher level of consciousness than the average people? Am I missing something here? Well, yes, you are definitely missing something. And it's understandable because the only way to really grasp this is to understand the concept that I have given in several videos about fallen beings. So if you're new to this concept, you need to watch my video about how the world was created, because in there I explain what a fallen being is and how they fell and why. So just to go back to the question and keep it relatively simple, we have been brought up to think that people who can accomplish great things in the world, physical results like starting a business, leading a business, creating an army, conquering land, and this kind of thing, that they must have some special abilities beyond the average human being, because the average human being couldn't do this. So the question here talks about a higher level of consciousness, and here's where we need to make a distinction. There is a difference between the abilities to do something in the world and higher level of consciousness. There is not a correspondence there. It doesn't follow that if you can accomplish something in the world, you have a high level of consciousness. At least not if you define higher level of consciousness as I do, where I have a breakthrough video where I talk about there are 144 levels of consciousness possible on Earth. So you can set up a scale. There's the very lowest level of consciousness you can be in. And the lowest level of consciousness is determined by your level of selfishness, self-centeredness. So in other words, narcissists, psychopaths, sociopaths, they are the lowest levels of consciousness. And then it gradually goes up where people become less and less selfish, more and more altruistic, more and more focused on the whole. And this goes to the 144th level, which is the highest, and when you reach that, you can ascend from Earth. So, where this ties in with fallen beings is that fallen beings have a very low level of consciousness. They are below what I call the 48th, where they are into the illusion of separation, and they're using the duality consciousness to manipulate others. But fallen beings really are in the very lowest. They're usually in the lowest, maybe 6, 8, 12 levels of consciousness. At least if they are the ones that are generally known. So you take a person like Hitler, Adolf Hitler. From a certain perspective, right, he was able to accomplish something. I mean, he created this huge German army and he conquered vast territory. Chairman Mao in China, he was able to take power over this entire nation and create these very big changes. And you can take some of the corporate leaders, like the question talks about, Rockefeller, Morgan, Carnegie, some of these known capitalists. And you can even look at business leaders today and say there are some that have accomplished great things in the world. But you see, as I explained in my video about how the world was created, fallen beings have had a much longer time to evolve or to be alive than the average person on Earth. Meaning, they have developed certain abilities about how to manipulate the physical material universe to their advantage. That's why they have certain abilities that are beyond the average person. But they have also, at the same time, they have gone lower and lower in consciousness, meaning they have become more and more selfish and self-focused. So that's why I'm saying the ability to achieve something in the world is not the same as having a high level of consciousness where you are less self-centered. And that's why you can look at many of these corporate leaders, you can look at political leaders, you can look at army leaders, generals and conquerors, Genghis Khan, and Ivan the Terrible, or Attila the Hun and others like that, Napoleon, the Roman emperors. And you can see that they had abilities to get something done, but it was because they had no concern whatsoever for the consequences of their actions upon other people or upon society. So they were willing to set aside any humanitarian concerns in order to achieve a specific result. And this is a concept that you find out there where you can have the concept of you're selling your soul to the devil. And the idea, in a sense, is that you're saying, you're making a deal with the devil where you say, if the devil will help you accomplish this thing in this world, he can have your soul after this lifetime. And this isn't something that the fallen beings have consciously done, because they're, in a sense, the devil also. But it's just that they don't care about the consequences of their actions. They believe in this, the ends can justify the means. Because they don't even need to consider the consequences of what they're doing. The goal is all important. So you can see some corporate leaders. What is all important? The profitability of the company, or the stock price, or the dividends to the shareholders. It's the results that matter. I mean, you have seen several times, many times, where you have this big corporation. Maybe it has 100,000 people. But the CEO realizes that the stock price is getting a little low, and maybe the perception of the company out there isn't as high as it could be, and it's always a matter of profitability. So what do they do to increase profitability? Well, you can increase sales, but if you can't increase sales, what can you do? You can cut cost. Okay, so let's boost the stock price by closing a couple of factories and firing 10,000 workers. Never mind that those families lose their income, and people may end up in the street, or they can't feed their children. Doesn't matter, because we raised the stock price, and that means our shareholders, who already are millionaires and have more money than they need, they get a bigger dividend. And I get the credit for being the CEO who raised the share price. And, you know, is that a high level of consciousness? I certainly don't think so. It's just a high level of ruthlessness and insensitivity to life. So that's not, I'm not saying this to incriminate all corporate leaders. I'm not saying all corporate leaders are that way. But you have to realize that the big corporations, especially the multinational corporations, they have gotten to a scale where they have lost the humanity, the human connection. See, you can have a business, for example, started by one person and who is still involved with the business. So he feels something personally for the people who helped him build the business, who are part of the business. But these CEOs of these big corporations, they have none of that. They didn't start the business, just came in and took over at a certain point. And they have certain goals to increase profitability and this and that. So they've lost the human dimension. It doesn't matter. And the unfortunate result of this kind of environment is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, a self-reinforcing process. In other words, what does it take to a person to work himself up in a corporation like that to where he can become the CEO? Well, he has to be ruthless and insensitive to human suffering, because that's the way to boost the share price and profitability and this and that. So in other words, a person who has a high level of consciousness is not as likely to apply for the position or work its way up through this corporate hierarchy. Because if you take it to a more extreme level, right, you have a criminal gang. Well, what does it take to be the leader of a criminal gang? You have to be more ruthless than any of the other people in the criminal gang. And it's a little bit the same in some corporations. You have to be more willing to put aside humanitarian concerns in order to focus on profitability than the other leaders. So there is this, I call it unnatural selection, because only those who are ruthless will even enter the process and will do what it takes to work their way up till they reach the top position. So the very corporate environment selects out those who have a higher level of consciousness, a higher humanity, and it selects in those who are the most ruthless and who don't care about people. So personally, I would say that most corporate leaders and many political leaders also don't have a high level of consciousness. I mean, you can see in dictatorships, what does it take to reach a high level? Take the Soviet Union, right? The Soviet Union was created as a result of a violent civil war. And they were ruthless, the Bolsheviks. And Lenin was a pretty ruthless person, but not nearly as ruthless as Stalin. But what was the reason why Stalin came to the top and stayed on top as long as he did? Because he was basically willing to kill anybody who challenged him. And even kill those who hadn't challenged him, so everybody was paranoid around him. I mean, there was actually a movie called The Death of Stalin. If you watch that movie, you see how all of the people around him were completely paranoid because they never knew if they were going to be killed for no reason whatsoever. But they couldn't remove themselves either. So I'm just saying this is an example of this. So in a dictatorship, in order to become a dictator, you have to be more ruthless than anybody else. And in order to stay in the position, you have to continue to be ruthless or even become even more ruthless. So that's why you see in Russia today that anybody who challenges Putin is instantly killed or put in jail. You can see how many politicians have been killed, have fallen out of windows. I just read this morning how there was a Russian woman, normal person, who had on social media said something negative about Putin, and now she was sentenced to 8 years in jail. And so you see this kind of thing going on. And unfortunately, you can see it sometimes in democracies as well, where there can be people who have this very judgmental attitude towards others. And it unfortunately, it selects people out that have a more humanitarian approach. Because you can create an environment where only those who are willing to, so to speak, follow the party line can survive in the environment or even want to be there. If you look at the United States today, you can see that in the Republican Party there has been a process where those who weren't loyal to Trump have simply been frozen out or kicked out. And this creates, again, an unnatural selection where only those people who are willing to follow the party line, so to speak, will even want to be in the environment where you see many of the more, what would you say, humanitarian, moderate, balanced Republicans, they're just simply withdrawn from office. They don't want to be part of the party anymore. And that creates this self-reinforcing process. You can agree with it or not with it. I'm not talking about this here. I don't want to enter a discussion about whether I agree with Trump or don't agree with Trump. I'm just pointing out that if you look at what has happened in the Republican Party over the last several years, you can see this process of unnatural selection working. And then you can draw your conclusions from there by comparing it to what has happened other places in history when you have this process of unnatural selection. Because when any organization, country, political party, corporation, when any organization begins to be ruled by people with a low level of humanity and a high level of ruthlessness or focus on results, this unnatural selection starts kicking in, because people who don't want to be in that kind of environment, they withdraw. And so that means that the ruthless people now take over, and it changes the whole dynamic of this organization. And you can just see many examples of that in history. And based on that, you can look at what's happening today, whatever organization you are interested in, and you can see if the same thing is happening there.